Welcome back to the 11th episode of the CEO Journey podcast, where we talk about all things entrepreneurship, advice, and personal development. Today, we have an incredibly special guest on the podcast, serial entrepreneur and investor, Roei Samuel. Roei, thank you very much for hopping on the pod. Really appreciate it. You're an absolute inspiration to me as an entrepreneur, so it's just great to have you on here, and it's a pleasure to meet you. How are you doing? How's life treating you?
Yeah, good. Thanks so much, Tom. Thanks a lot for having me on as well. Really great to be part of it. Yeah, things are good. I mean, it's a really interesting time at the moment. Obviously, economically, there's a lot of pain right now, both for businesses as well as individuals. But it's a really interesting time for growing a business. I think right now we're seeing a return to a focus on business fundamentals in a way that we probably weren't seeing in 2021. And if you were building a business which was more focused on better unit economics, building those fundamentals in a more core way, it's actually a pretty good time. It's proven resilience and proven that you can continue to grow through a bit of pain. But a really interesting time to be running a high growth startup.
Completely agree, and it's great to hear that you're doing so well. Have you got a brief introduction to yourself, Roei, so the viewers can understand where you currently are?
Yeah, of course. So I've been involved in startups since I'm 16 years old. So like yourself, entrepreneurial from a very young age, originally getting involved with performance marketing, although it wasn't called performance marketing at the time, getting involved with product roles. Then whilst I was studying my master's down at LSE, I founded my first technology company, which was essentially a content creation toolkit. So helping people create podcasts, videos, other types of content, and then a community to share everything with, as well as giving them tools for social amplification. And this is just sort of 2013, 14 time. So just when lots of traditional content creators were trying to transition into social. I know it's crazy. It's only 8 years ago, but it was different world back then. And we applied that toolkit and content creation environment really to sports, esports, and gaming. Massive sports fan myself, and then we just saw a real opportunity in esports and gaming as well. We got very fortunate with the timing there. Managed to scale it to about 8 million monthly active unique users, wow. Which is a really great journey. Primarily UK, US, and Australia. That business was acquired by a gaming company called Gfinity in 2018. Really cool learning experience. Very interesting going from scrappy startup to being on the senior management team of a publicly listed company and getting to understand the joys and pains of being public rather than private. Firmly decided that private markets is much more my bag. So started investing into early stage companies, advising startups, normally quite informally as a board advisor, but occasionally as a non-exec as well. And then started working on a new software platform called Connected in 2019.
Wow, that's a lot. And it's just great to hear how your journey just progressed. But with all entrepreneurs I have on the podcast, where I love to just understand a bit of context about themselves. So, take us back. What was your childhood like? Who was young Roei? And is there anything from your earlier life that really shaped the person you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So I had a really interesting upbringing in the sense that my mum was originally from Hungary. They were born into communist Hungary. They escaped. They ended up in a refugee camp for a while, ended up displaced, landed in Glasgow in the 80s, which I always joke. I'm not sure if Glasgow in the 80s was better or worse than communist Hungary. Pretty hard to tell. My dad coming from that part of Glasgow as well. And they made a bit of money together, not a lot, moved down to London. My dad was always an entrepreneur. I mean, he started out originally as a bus driver, taxi driver, didn't have any of the sort of background in finance or anything like that, but was a real entrepreneur, was a hustler in many ways, and built up a few different sales companies, got involved in telecoms. So for me, growing up, was always exposed to the ups and downs of entrepreneurialism. We had some really good years growing up. When I was 7 years old, my dad lost everything completely. My mum got ill around that time. There was a few years where we had no income coming into the house. So was also very aware and had experienced the other side of entrepreneurialism that isn't often glamorized, but is often the case, where there's some really difficult times as well. So yeah, I was really well versed in what it was going to mean from a sacrifice, from a risk perspective as well, starting an entrepreneurial journey.
Wow. And you've talked about a bit of the hardships. So obviously your dad lost everything at one point, and then your mum suffered with illness. Did that really drive and motivate you to achieve later in life?
I think, growing up, so my dad from East End Glasgow, my mum from communist Hungary, and then I grew up in Northwest London. And it was a real, my upbringing was probably very, very different to a lot of people around me. I was always very aware that we didn't have things that other people have. And, it's not all about that by any means. But I think having that realization that if I wanted to do the things I wanted in life, if I wanted financial freedom, if I wanted, nice things, whatever it might be, there wasn't going to be a safety net. It wasn't going to be, I could go work for my dad's mates. I could go, inherit whatever it is. So I knew from a very early age, whatever I was going to make was going to be off my own back, which is, I think, definitely led to a really, really strong work ethic. And, I'm not the smartest by any means. I'm not the most talented by any means, but always try and be the hardest working in the room. And that served me well.
And I think I've also read somewhere that you've suffered at a young age with really severe ADHD. What was it like suffering with ADHD? And, did it affect school experiences, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. So ADHD and dyslexia as well. I was really badly behaved at school. I was nearly expelled at 13. That's what actually led to me getting the ADHD diagnosis, which was really, really useful. I started taking medication when I was 15, and I found that to be, a challenging period of time, but very, very useful ultimately, because the path that I was on and could have been on versus the path I ended up on. Because people have very, very mixed views on medication for ADHD. I think for some people it can be a good thing. For some people it can be quite impactful, and there are definitely downsides to it. But in terms of what I needed at that time and turning my life around, but yeah, it was a real light bulb moment when I was diagnosed with ADHD, and especially when I started learning, especially into my 20s, mid-20s, about the different types of thoughts that are associated, different types of thinking, I should say, that are associated with ADHD. For example, you can have magical thinking, where one day you wake up, nothing's different than it was the day before, but you can conquer the world, right? The world is your oyster. You're going to be a world beater. Nothing can stand your path. The next day, again, objectively, nothing's changed, but you feel, I don't know, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. And the next day you feel like shit and you don't know why, and you can't do anything. And it was really confusing growing up, really confusing to my 20s. And then when you start learning about it and realize, oh, that's just the way that the ADHD brain works, that's obviously really, really helpful. And then if you can start managing, or at least understanding, those types of thoughts patterns, those triggers, types of behaviors, you can really use the upsides of ADHD, of which there are many, many, many. But that's why I think it's, getting that diagnosis was really, really helpful.
I completely agree with the upsides as well, because there's two sides of it. There's one side that says, it's a complete detriment, and the stereotype is someone who's lack of focus, lack of concentration. But then there's the other half where people describe it as almost like a superpower.
Yeah.
So were you able to harness the power of ADHD, and has that helped you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, especially if you're going down the route of entrepreneurialism, as long as you can identify your weaknesses and bring amazing people in around you who can do the things which ADHD don't necessarily lend themselves to allow you to focus on creativity, making commercial deals happen, building cool products, pushing things forward in a more, right brain thinking perspective. So, for example, my COO at my first business, RealSport, my guy called Kyle, my COO at Connected, amazing lady called Claudia. Having the right people around you who can allow you to utilize the superpower elements is so important. But I know I'm very, very fortunate in the sense of, if I was employed, maybe you've got an employer who doesn't understand those things, who doesn't create the optimum environment to allow neurodivergence to flourish. So I guess, hopefully more and more people will allow for that to happen. More and more people will understand the importance of doing that. But for me, I'm fortunate, obviously, running my own businesses, that we gear up in a way that we want to create the best environment possible for all the different types of diversity that we have.
No, 100%. And there's some great lessons in there. And on the subject of lessons, so you talked about your dad being an entrepreneur. and going through failure and then success. What were the key lessons that you learned from watching your dad pursue entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's loads to be learned from it. I think one of the things is entrepreneurialism is a lifelong passion. It's not a project. I think I see a lot of people who fancy trying entrepreneurialism, and it's glorified in a lot of places. And being 15 years ago, I don't think being an entrepreneur was like a cool thing to do, right? It was like, let's go work in finance, let's go work in banking, let's do something like that. Now it's like a lot of people want to be an entrepreneur, which is great, but I think if you are committed to entrepreneurialism, you need to accept there's going to be failures along the way. Not necessarily always catastrophic failures, but you're going to launch something which just didn't go. Like, for example, when we were running RealSport, we tried to launch Real Pets and Real Food because we thought there was an opportunity to apply what we were doing in different markets, and they failed horribly. We've made loads of mistakes along the way. I've made investments that have flopped completely, even including some crypto assets that I backed recently, which are not necessarily doing well right now. So, I think it's a lifelong journey, and seeing it with my dad, who, lost everything at, let's say 50 years old and had to rebuild again and finally got back to success in his early 60s. You realize it comes, it goes. There are good times, there are bad times, but that's why it's got to be a lifelong passion, not I tried something, it didn't work, therefore I'm done with entrepreneurialism. Because you need that mental resilience as well, right? If the first first 5 failures are going to knock you back, then it's not for you, because failure is part of this game.
100%. So when did you decide to take the plunge into entrepreneurship, and how difficult was it for you to take that risk?
Yeah, so I actually thought I wasn't going to do the entrepreneurial thing for a while. I was always running side projects. So, for example, running events whilst at uni. I was doing all different things that I could to just make money on the side, but not even just to make money on the side, just because I enjoyed doing them. But I was actually en route to becoming a diplomat. That's what I wanted to do. Wow. So I was I'm still like my one of my real passions, one I loves is international relations. Right. Obviously, super interesting time in the world right now. So I was studying a master's in international conflict studies at LSE. But whilst I was there, I just really organically started creating content, started looking at opportunities in that space, and that's what led us to creating that content creation toolkit. So it happened super organically. Didn't set out to do it in that way, but an opportunity arose, and eventually it just became so clear that was the best opportunity I had at the time, and it was the thing which felt right and was getting the most traction. So it became a bit of a no-brainer to put down the diplomacy hat for a while.
So what was that opportunity that you saw?
So that was RealSport. So that was RealSport. So yeah, exactly. So we were looking at different ways of creating content, and we initially started out targeting the student market, helping students create blogs, videos, and then basically bring them together online. Because I don't know if how old are you, Tom?
19.
All right, so I don't know if you might remember this or not, but 9-10 years ago, if you wanted to create content, people were creating blogs. Even during Facebook time, like, people had blogs, right? They were a really big thing. Like every man's dog who wanted to create content had a blog, and they were getting like 10 views, right? Because no one was going to each other's blogs. Right. So we had so many students had their own blogs, and they were writing content in different places, trying to distribute long form content through Facebook, which, for example, just doesn't work, especially at that time didn't work, probably now even less so. So we realized there was an opportunity if we could start aggregating these different content creators, giving them a toolkit, giving them a way to cross-pollinate with each other's audiences, that would be something really useful. And this was really pre-monetization of online content. There was no real format for just turning on ads on content in the way that there is now, obviously. So our approach was trying to get brands to sponsor things, brands to create content with us. But at that time, brands didn't care about students. Students have got no money to spend, as we know. So we ended up pivoting into sports and gaming, where obviously big brands are much more interested in capturing those eyeballs and a huge addressable market.
And was sports and gaming your passion then?
Yeah, huge sports fan still. Although, funnily enough, after running a a company so involved in the business side of sports. It did ruin it a little bit for me. So there was a couple of years after we sold RealSport in 2018. I was all sported out for about 2 years, but now very much back into my football, NBA, NFL.
Right. Okay. No, that's super interesting, and it's quite interesting to probably understand what your first year in business was like, and from an idea point to then attracting a strong user base.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I always say this to any entrepreneur, especially a young entrepreneur: your first business has to be fueled primarily by delusion.
Right.
Because yeah, just because you've never run a business before, right?
Yeah.
So you have no experience, you have no idea really what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's all a learning experience. Of course, you've got to bring in the right people who can help you along the way, but realistically, if it's your first business, if you've got family contacts who are going to fund it, maybe you can hire experienced people very quickly. But for most people, your first year is just figuring stuff out. So we had rented from my co-founder's family friend a basement underneath Papa John's, where we were literally like living out of this windowless basement for the first year, just trying to get
Real hustle.
Yeah, like proper hustle. Like we paid a couple engineers that we knew basically nothing for our first MVP, just to start getting something together. And then so we started working on that business in January 15. And then, or maybe even it must have been late 14, maybe even mid 14. And then we raised our first bit of funding in early 16 as well. So it took about a year and a half to get that first bit of funding. And that was just hustle. And neither me or my co-founder at the time had money. It was a real
Wow.
pretty desperate situation in the sense of, it was very much like, especially for me, after giving up the grad schemes that I could have done on the master after doing a master's, and like all the money I invested in doing a master's, like it was a real risk there. But I love risk, right? Any entrepreneur does. But yeah, things obviously went really well, and we got lucky with a bit of right time, right place. This was back when you could really market content organically through Facebook in a way that you can't now. Now it's all pay to play. If you want to make it then get any views on any content, any views on any ads, you got to spend a lot. Back then you didn't. So we, just utilize the tools available to at that time. And sports is an amazing market to be in. It's passion economy, right? People love sports. And if you love it, people want to get involved. So yeah, we got really fortunate.
And you've talked about building an MVP and then raising the funding after that. What was it like your first time raising funding? How did you go about getting that investment?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I would advise especially if you're a first time founder, is you need a good lawyer. Like you do need a good lawyer. You need someone who's going to be fighting your corner, helping you navigate the things that you will inevitably make a mistake with when you're a first founder. Because when it comes to fundraising, doing your legal getting the legal due diligence done, getting all your docs in place. When we went to sell the company, I think it took maybe like 3 months from offer through to full acquisition.
Wow.
Because we did everything so by the book. I mean, normally like an acquisition, especially traditionally, could take up to like a year, maybe longer, and that can be a nightmare for startups. But we were so on it from day one because we had a good lawyer. So I think it's really important to understand that side of it. The other thing is, first time founder, MVP, maybe very small traction. The only thing that's going to raise your investment is your passion. It's your passion, your conviction in what you're doing. Because that's what people back. There's no first few years, even with early track, there's nothing to go on. Like numbers don't mean much at the very, very early stage, especially if you've just got an MVP or even pre-MVP. It's all about the pitch. So, I know people who, they're stars. You can tell they're stars. You can tell they can wow a room. That you can tell they're going to inspire people who've raised millions without, pre-product, pre-MVP, pre-revenue. And there are people who have built really interesting MVPs from an engineering background who just can't raise. As a big part of it is your ability to instill that passion, tell that story, and get the people around you, investors, customers, employees, excited. So I think that's one of the things which, it's hard to codify. It's hard to say, well, how am I going to do that? But it's, that's something which people need to really practice. And, some people do stand-up comedy for it. Some people do public speaking courses, like whatever it is. But that ability to inspire and really grab your audience, that's 9 times out of 10, the difference between fundraising and not fundraising.
And did you do it through angel investors, or did you go to a big VC? What was your play?
So our first round was 2 angel investors in a family office. We met the 2 angel investors just by literally knocking on doors, going to events.
Wow.
It took us a long time to find them. Not actually knocking on doors, but going to events. Going to as many events as we could. Just messaging people on different platforms, just asking, starting to build connections. It was a slow way of doing it. Now the amount of tooling that's available for founders, things like Connected R platform, things like Valban, SPV platforms, all these amazing pieces of technology that exist to help founders raise more quickly, more easily, did not exist back then. So now, in terms of like getting access to angels, getting access to low barrier ways of raising money is amazing. This is the best time ever to be a founder raising an early stage round.
And what was your growth strategy with RealPlan?
So RealSport, our growth strategy.
RealSport, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's right. So our growth strategy was really taking it sport by sport. Okay. So we were just looking at because what we wanted to have is we wanted to make sure we had a critical mass of content creators before trying to service a market. So because our way of acquiring lots of content creators was finding people with blogs, finding people out there who were creating content, it was really a case of making sure we had enough critical mass within each sport before formally launching it. But also we were very, very good at driving growth loops within the technology itself. So because we were giving people tools for social amplification, they weren't just building or creating content for RealSport itself. They're building that content, distributing it through Twitch, Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, Reddit, that larger sports forums back when that was a thing. So by giving them the tools for amplifying their content elsewhere, you're drawing more people into the funnel.
I see.
So you're creating lots of virality that way. So there was like a more content-led approach, building up critical mass within each sport, and then a real product-led or creator-led acquisition channel as well, by giving the tools for social amplification.
And then at what point did you think, right, now's the best time to exit the business?
So in truth, I mean, look, I was broke. I was super broke at the time. Hadn't made any money yet. So for me, the opportunity to exit, the opportunity to change my life, the opportunity to change, my co-founder was the same. We didn't have anything at that time. We were literally, literally both in a decent amount of debt when we sold the company. So it was a bit of a no-brainer. And I know it's a controversial thing to say, because a lot of people will say, you should hold out, you should do these things, but a lot of those people maybe have bigger safety nets than we had at that time. So for me, it was the way that it came about is we had this gaming company who were amazing at B2B activations within esports. So they were working with the Premier League, with the Formula One, with the NBA, and they were running all their esports tournaments. So there's like the E-Premier League, the E-Formula One. So they were operating all of that operation. What they didn't have was a consumer insight arm or a data insight arm. They were doing they had these amazing contracts and amazing deals with these big rights holders. They just didn't have any distribution, any amplification, any of the consumer part. So they initially came to us and said, look, we want you to create content for us. We want you to create a community for us. And then it just, over time, it just became obvious that they were better off just acquiring us.
Yeah. And was that was Gfinity, wasn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Gfinity, yeah. And how did it feel when you had that large reward from building up the business from scratch?
Yeah, totally unfulfilling, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, totally unfulfilling. It just, I mean, fulfilling in the sense of, I'm super fortunate. Since that day, I've never had to worry about a bill. I've never had to worry about the wolves at the door. I've never had to worry about that side of it. So obviously I'm so grateful for that side of things, especially everything going on in the world at the moment. But I think you realize the joy is in the building, the joy is in the exciting thing was someone wants to buy this. Right.
Yes.
Someone wants to buy this. We've built something of such value that someone wants to spend a significant amount of money
Yeah.
on making their
It's
own.
like validation, isn't it?
Exactly that. It was that validation. That was a really exciting part. And then once it was over, I spent 12, 18 months, maybe 15 months, something like that, just angel investing, advising startups, really enjoyed that side of it. And then, started building something very shortly after. I had to do a year integration. So we were acquired in 2018. That year of integrating companies is over in 19, and I started building pretty much straight away.
Yeah, and moving on from RealSport, so obviously you sold it, and then you went into angel investing before. Or was it before or alongside running Connected?
It was before. It was before. It was very much the issues that I saw within that market, especially because I was always very good at keeping my investors in the loop because I had a good lawyer. Because this was what it comes down to having a good lawyer, right? Because I had a good lawyer advising me on these things. I was always very, very good at investor relations. When I started writing checks, I realized there's a lot of founders who do not understand that part of it. And there's no better lesson than writing a 75K check, for example, and then never hearing from the founder again and not knowing what's going on with your money, right? Yeah. So that got me really, really passionate about understanding how we could make that founder to investor, founder to advisor, founder to board member relationship as frictionless as possible. And now I was recording a podcast yesterday with Nick Telson, who was founder of Design My Night, and a huge angel investor, has invested in 60 companies now. And pretty much all the big angel investors I speak to, the rate of success of companies who do regular investor reporting versus those who don't is insane. Wow. Because doing the regular reporting keeps you on track, keeps you honest, keeps you focused, keeps your investors in the loop. So if there's any bumps in the road that you're not spending that time trying to scramble around, keeping them back up to date with what's been going on. It also allows them to help you. You should always be asking your investors for things. So we were really, really passionate about making that investor reporting process as frictionless as possible for founders and investors to try and improve the success rate of companies in the UK and beyond.
So what does that technology look like then?
So essentially what we've built is a reporting suite for founders, which integrates with bank accounts, accounting softwares, payment solutions, CRMs. We ingest all that data and then populate investor reporting tools for them so that they don't, because it's quite a long thing to do investor reporting. So this is just auto-populating everything for them. We give them the ability to share certain information with their executive teams, certain information with board members, certain information with new investors, so giving them that full configurability. You don't need to be 100% transparent with everything with everyone at the time. And then we built a portfolio management solution for investors on the other side. So they're able to store all the information about how much they invested, when they invested, store all their legal docs as well. But where it gets quite smart is if they verify they're an investor in a company and the company verifies that they are on their cap table, we actually port over that real-time information. So now investors are getting real-time insights into their portfolio in the way that you would with a crypto wallet or with public shares, which hasn't really been done before for this part of the ecosystem.
That's super interesting. And if we just bring it slightly back to your angel investing stage, what are 3 things that Roei Samuel looks for when investing in a startup?
Do you know what? It's funny. Angels are quite emotional people, and I would say I am unfortunately quite an emotional person. I do love underdogs, right? So one of the first checks I ever wrote was to a team with the co-founders where one was person of color, the other one was a female. I've always invested in underrepresented founders. I like underdogs. I really do like the underdogs because I think those have the most grit. And I think that they have that resilience that is so key. But also, as time's gone on, especially as I've started, as I've been the founder of Connected for the last few years, I found myself investing more and more through syndicates, investing later stage as well. So investing into Series A rather than pre-seed through syndicates as well. Some of the syndicates I'm involved with get access to slightly later stage deals. So now that I don't have the time to be as involved with the startups I invest in as I was during that 12-month period, I probably am being much less emotional about it and a bit more calculated, but maybe that's just a sign of me growing up. Who knows?
And what lesson have you learned from failed investments?
Really good question. I'd say in the ones which hurt are the ones where you didn't love the people.
Right.
If you love the people, like a failed investment is, it's obviously right, you lose money, but you can feel very, very happy that you backed something that you liked. You can also feel very, very happy that you've built a relationship with people who you think are going to do interesting things. So one of my biggest investors, a guy called Roei,
Right.
he's got super deep pockets, and he's an awesome guy, like an amazing teacher, everything else. But one of the things I've learned from him is he backs people, right? So that means even if it didn't work out on the first one, you might probably going to back you again in the second or the third. So it's about building relationships. It's about thinking very, very long term about these things. But then sometimes you have a nightmare. I invested in what I can only describe as a crook. I invested in someone who, I invested a decent chunk of money as part of a 600K rounds. And the company had a like 30K a month runway, right? So these guys had serious runway. Obviously, they were going to increase it a little bit off the back of the round, but 3 months later, they were out of cash, and the guy pretty much disappeared off the face of the earth.
Oh.
So, yeah, so it's another reason I'm passionate about transparency between founders and investors. So, yeah, sometimes you just have a mare.
So I guess what you're saying is like just loving the people and backing the full vision of the company.
Yeah.
That ties into the passion thing that you were saying about as well, which is great. But like if an entrepreneur comes to you and they say, look, I'm completely lost. I want to raise finance for the business. I don't know where to start. What would you advise them to do?
I think the starting point for any founder looking to raise is what's your ambition? Because where I see founders wasting the most amount of time whilst trying to raise money is not realizing that for their ambitions, there are certain types of investors who are relevant for them. Right. So I see businesses who have built something really cool, something really interesting. The founder's like, yeah, we can get this to 10 million a year turnover. We can sell this for 50 to 100 million, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong, it's fucking great. And then they spend 6 months wasting their time pitching VCs, right? Because a VC is only going to invest in an idea if it's potentially going to be worth 3 to 10 billion or whatever it is. Right. So the first starting point for any founders, what's your ambition and what's a realistic, potential exit for your business? Because until you know those things, there's no point pitching different types of investors. Some angel investors, for example, they are operating on they want an 100x return. I know lots of angel investors who back more traditional businesses, which might get to 5-6 million turnover and give them a 10 to 20x return, right? So you need to just get aligned with investors and understand what their motivations are, what your motivations are, and if they match. Because otherwise, you just you are just doing spray and pray, right? It doesn't work.
So would you advise like just defining your ambition, then staying away from VCs if it's not if it's more niche, if that's what you're
exactly. If it's not a venture scale business, that's spot on, Tom. If it's not a venture scale business, and venture scale meaning this could be worth billions, don't bother with VCs.
Right. Okay. And to find angels, apart from like obviously connected and stuff like that, would you say leverage networks, all that sort of stuff?
Absolutely, leverage networks, networking events. One of the most impactful ways of reaching angel investors and VCs for that matter is through portfolio companies founders. So for example, let's say you see an angel that you think's really interesting and you see he's invested in these companies, speaking to those companies, building a relationship with those founders, seeing if they think it would be a good fit for their investors. Most VCs I speak to say that's their favorite way of getting deal flow is from a founder of one of their portfolio companies. So if you can build and leverage those networks, that's a great way of doing it. Always start with your own network, right?
No, 100%, completely agree. And thank you for sharing that advice, Roei, because that's like really helpful for me and Joe with the stage that we're at currently. But with Connected, what's your long-term vision with that?
Yeah, so we're we're at a really interesting point now where we will be profitable back end of next year. Probably go into a Series A Q1 2024. I've just spent the last 2.5 months out in the US, starting to build connections there and starting to build a bit of presence there, because eventually we see ourselves there in the long term. But yeah, right now it's just driving to profitability, because I think in this environment, if you can be an outlier, i.e., continue high growth rates with reducing burn and getting to profitability, you'll be in a really, really great position getting into 2024.
So you're looking to go global with this, and it's a big global thing.
Yeah, so the way that we've built the technology means that the network effect that we've layered in and some of those growth loops. So, for example, founders distribute reports to their investors. Their investors could be London, but they could be San Fran, Stockholm, Singapore, and they say, "Oh, it's awesome! I can consolidate my portfolio in one place." Their portfolio companies, again, can be multinational. So we've only ever targeted marketing in the UK, but we have paying customers in about 18 countries by the way, through the way that the technology distributes. So it's definitely a global play, but in order to localize and optimize for specific regions, there's obviously a lot of investment in technology and development that goes into that. So before we launch the US, there's a lot of work to do on the product side for sure.
Well, that's great, and it's amazing to hear your long-term vision with the company, and we obviously wish you the best of luck with that. I'm sure it's going to be an absolute success. But I feel like that's a great place to, wrap up this podcast. But before, we completely wrap up, what's your one piece of advice you'd give to any entrepreneur out there? Something that you've learned?
That's a really good question. I think the biggest piece of advice I would give to any entrepreneur, young entrepreneur, is understand what you want in life, not just in business. We spoke a bit about, if you do start a business, what the ambition is. Understand what you want in life. If you value work-life balance, like if for you an important, I mean this in the most sincere way, like if for your mental health, for example, the most important thing is like running 10 miles on the weekend, or going to the gym every single day, or then you've got to protect your own mental health first. So you've got to be very honest with yourself about what you want in life, what you want to sacrifice. Do you love having the most amazing social life, right? If so, entrepreneurialism's probably not for you. It's probably not going to work. So you've got to be just so honest with yourself about, do you want, especially when you're going to take other people's money, right? Especially when you take other people's money, do you want to do that sacrifice? Do you want to give up all the things that you're going to have to do? And I started my first business at uni. I went from having the most amazing uni social life, as I'm sure you're enjoying now, down to I have 3 best mates now, right? They're my best mates, but there's 3 of them, So and those are the things, and that's just the reality of it. I'm not glamorizing, that's just the reality of it. So you've got to think about your own mental health. It's the most important thing. You've got to think about your own happiness, the most important thing. But if you're slightly masochistic, slightly psychopathic in a way, where actually you would rather focus on building something up and doing that, rather than enjoying some of the other amazing things that there are in life, because there's that trade-off, then do it. But if not, there's nothing wrong with that. There's been many days on my journey where I wish I didn't want to do this, and I wish I'd gone the corporate route, for example, because you can make great money that way and have stability and everything else. But if you're ready to make that sacrifice, do it. There's nothing better.
No, 100%. It's that self-awareness and transparency with yourself, and just being completely honest on what you want. So yeah, great advice, Roei. But yeah, as I said, great place to wrap up the podcast. Thank you so much for hopping on. Really enjoyed it, and I just can't wait to get it out to the viewers. But before we end it, have you got anything that you want to say? Any final last words or anything?
No, thank you so much for having me on. For anyone listening, follow me on LinkedIn, where I try and post as much useful content as possible. I've got a fortnightly newsletter which I release through LinkedIn called Founder, which is things that I wish I knew as a first-time founder. And I've also got a podcast called Big Risk Energy, which I recently released, which we're releasing every Thursdays as well.
Right, we'll be plugging that in the description for you, Roei, and getting that out for you. So yeah, great. Thank you for hopping on. As I've said, and good luck with everything that you're doing with Connected. Thank you very much for listening to this episode with Roei Samuel. It's been an absolute pleasure having him on, and make sure you stay tuned for the next episode.